Hello and welcome. Come in and sit yourself by the fire. The world goes on outside this room, but here with me, there are only the stories and time has stopped. Are you ready? I'll begin. The Double Crown of Collavar, Part 1. Let me introduce you now to Morag, a lass of 17 who lives with her blind aunt Katrina in a cottage lost among the mists on the western side of the island. No one could have imagined what was to befall her, least of all herself. Morag and Katrina lived a very reclusive life and saw no one. This might not be too unusual for the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, but there were some particularities to their quiet lives, for not only did they see no one, they could not see themselves. There was no mirror, no reflective surfaces in their wee house, and Katrina, being blind, could not even describe Morag to her. The little education Morag had received came from her aunt reciting what she could remember of the Bible and the telling of tales of warriors and witches that were older even than that. The last visit from a human had been a young minister called Eamon Burns 2 years earlier, and this was not a happy memory for anyone involved. When he entered the croft and saw the girl, he blushed and stammered and immediately asked her to cover her hair. She did so, but this act of modesty didn't satisfy him, for only a short time later he asked her to lower her eyes, and finally he bid her leave the room altogether. Morag, who had never seen a young man, not even a very serious and frankly average-looking young man like Eamon Burns, would have delighted in some male company. But instead, she was sent out into the rain alone and with nowhere else providing shelter, ended up sitting in the barn with the cow, where, despite the cold, she burned with miserable resentment and a sense of injustice. What she could not know was that after he had finished his parish visit, he had peeked at her through the open slat at the back of the barn and nearly wept with desire. And on his way back to town, he stopped to bathe in the cold water of the river and stayed there until he was blue and shaking. And when he got home, he spent 4 nights without sleeping, praying fervently to have the lustful images of Morag purged from his mind. And when God paid no heed to this request, he gave up his post and went down to Liverpool, where he was never heard of again. The fairies, of course, who were always hanging about in corners or upon tufts of grass to observe human goings-on, had watched the whole episode with amused delight. They kept a record of everything, a kind of black book, you could call it, because one never knew when something might come in handy. And so it was that Morag was chosen to play her part in the fall of the house of Malcolm, King of Collavar. A fairy, whose real name, as with all fairy names, can never be divulged, took the human name Shona and the form of a beautiful young woman with milk-white skin, green gold eyes and hair the colour of a raven's wing. When Morag went to the well that morning, as she always did with her pail to fetch the water, she saw a graceful young lady looking into the well with a dreamy air. Could it be a person of her own age? Perhaps she could have a friend at long last. She approached and put down her wooden bucket and wished the young woman hello with a great smile. The fairy turned her head but didn't answer, and instead of receiving a smile in return, Morag saw the young woman looking at her with round and pained eyes, and then slow tears began to roll down her cheeks, where they clung to her skin like crystals and only embellished her beauty further. The young woman then bit her lip and turned her head away. Morag took another step forward and put her hand on her shoulder tentatively. "Beautiful stranger, why are you crying?" she asked. "If I had even a half of your beauty, I'm sure I would sing with joy every morning." The fairy smiled through her tears. "Oh, hello. Yes, my name is Shona. What's yours?" "Morag." "Morag, is it? Okay, I've heard of you, and it's you I've been looking for. I have a question." Morag was taken aback. Why would a stranger come looking for her to ask her a question? The problem was she had no real experience of other people. Perhaps this was what other people did. And besides, she didn't mind answering, so she nodded and smiled and waited for the question. "Do you really believe that beauty makes people happy?" "Well," said Morag, "yes, I think so, except I see you crying. Why are you crying?" The fairy peeked at her beneath her eyelashes and instead of answering, asked yet another question. "Why do you think beauty makes people happy?" Because it brings love," Morag answered. The fairy showed a tiny little smile in her big beautiful eyes, which disappeared at once, and then she spoke again. "You're right. Beauty is necessary to find love, and that's why I'm crying. You see, you're so young and have such a good heart. I can feel how you must hope to meet your true love. But may I speak the truth?" "Of course," said Morag. "Truth is God's language." "Then I shall tell you. I had heard rumours, and now I have the confirmation of my own eyes. I know that you will never find love because, and please know that I say this for your own good, you are most terribly, terribly ugly." Morag felt a wave of fear run through her whole body, followed by a strange and bitter clarity. She was not angry with Shona. She was grateful. Someone had at last told her the truth. It explained everything about her life. That was why she lived with a blind woman and they never saw anyone. And that was why the young minister could not even look upon her and why he had never returned after his visit. She saw life now as it must be, clearly for the first time, a loveless expanse of solitude. And tears ran down her face, too. Ugly tears, she was sure, snotty, red-staining salt rivers on a hideous bed of pale mud. "I can help you," said the fairy in a low voice, reaching out a dainty hand that didn't quite touch her. "I'm so sorry that I gave you pain, but I should never have said such a cruel thing if I didn't know how to remedy your problem. You see, I was once just like you." "No," exclaimed Morag. "I swear it is true." Shona didn't even need to cross her fingers behind her back for this one, for it was true that her natural form looked like a pile of twisted sticks with matted hair. She giggled a little internally. "And now you see how I am." She got up and did a little twirl. "And I have a fiancé who's rich and handsome and kind and loving, and so shall you. All I did was to help the Lady of Benfavar just a tiny bit." Morag felt a tingle go down her spine. On the island and all the islands round about, those words were understood to mean that someone had done a deal with the fairies. She felt a natural hesitation, but it didn't last long. What did she have to lose after all? Tell me, Shona, what did you have to do?
Well, almost nothing at all. They asked me to stay in a cave for 1 moon, but the time passed easily. I had a comfortable bed and delicious food was left outside the cave entrance every day. I have never eaten so well. My only duties were to look after a beautiful and enchanted sword. You may find this hard to believe, but it was excellent company and told me stories and sang me songs and sometimes asked me riddles. She smiled nostalgically. I almost miss the dear sword, and perhaps I would go and visit if I weren't so happy with my darling Neil.
And you think I could do the same thing?
Oh, I'm quite sure of it.
Well, what would I need to do?
It's simple. You just take this bowl, and I will put in a silver coin that was given to me by the Lady of the Mountain, and all you need to do is drink it until the last drop, and you will be transformed.
Morag watched the fairy drop a silver coin into her bowl. She looked down into the water, but she couldn't see her face. The water seemed to dance, as if mercifully disallowing the sight of how hideous she must be. She took a deep breath, swallowed, and then drank down all of the water in one go. She sat waiting with the cold feeling of the well waters running in her throat. Shona was sitting on the edge of the well looking at her with a small smile.
You don't feel it?
Morag shook her head.
And yet...
Shona took out a pocket mirror and handed it to Morag. Morag took it as if it might burn her. What if this was just a cruel joke? What if there were people waiting in the bushes to mock her? Well, at least she would know. She flipped over the mirror and looked at her face for the very first time. Ever since she'd understood her own ugliness, she'd made a face for herself in her head with a lantern jaw and thin lips, a crooked nose and drooping, colourless eyes. But there in the mirror was a white-skinned girl with crystal green eyes and a full mouth the colour of the pink roses that grew in the garden when the winter had not been too harsh. She was every bit as beautiful as Shona. Shona clapped her hands and laughed.
Oh, it is a crime to send you to live in a cave out of the sight of the world, but it will only be for a short time, and then you will shine. How you will shine! What man could not love you now?
Morag sat in a daze. Perhaps life would be as beautiful as her face promised it would be. She pinched the inside of her wrist just in case she was dreaming, but no, the red mark stung and she could feel a cool breeze playing over her skin. She was very much awake and her life had just been changed forever. The fairy told her where she was to go now, and it was the strangest thing because as Shona was speaking, describing the path and where she would find the secluded cave, she could see it all perfectly in her mind, as if Shona was pouring images directly into it.
You must leave at once, warned Shona, and tell no one where you are going. You must promise. Those are the conditions, and if you don't keep them, you'll return to being what you once were. Do you understand?
I do.
Do you promise?
I promise.
Good luck, child, and may everything go to plan.
Morag might have wondered what plan Shona was referring to if her head hadn't been so full of dreams as she made her way through the heather on the moor that led up to the cave. And so ends the first part of the Double Crown of Collavar. Thank you for listening. I hope I'll see you here again to find out what happens when Morag goes to the cave and meets the sword and starts the clock on one of the most ingenious and terrible plans the Fae folk have ever devised.